I want to start with something honest that many men don't talk about. Most men don't actually fear intimacy. What they fear is rejection. That moment when they make a move and the woman responds in a way that shuts the connection down. Maybe she pulls back, becomes distant, or says something that instantly kills the vibe. That fear of getting it wrong is what keeps so many men from taking the next step. But here's the truth. There is a way to approach intimacy that avoids desperation, pressure, and the sting of rejection. And it doesn't require tricks or manipulation. It's about understanding how women experience desire, how they emotionally decide when they feel ready, and who they feel safe being close with. Once you understand this, you can create moments where intimacy becomes natural, mutual, and deeply fulfilling. Before we dive into the techniques, there's a simple but powerful concept you need to understand. Women don't reject intimacy itself. They reject the emotional experience attached to it. If the experience feels unsafe, pressured, or misaligned with their feelings, the answer will be no. But if it feels safe, exciting, and emotionally aligned, intimacy flows effortlessly. This distinction is crucial because most men approach intimacy like a transaction. They ask, they push, they look for an immediate yes or no. But human desire doesn't work like that. Desire is not logical, it's emotional. The reality is that many men make the same mistakes when it comes to intimacy. They ask too directly, too early, with nervous energy, or without building an emotional connection first. They treat intimacy like a checkbox to be ticked rather than a natural outcome of shared emotional alignment. What women respond to isn't boldness alone or a confident line. It's a combination of feeling safe, understood, desired, and emotionally connected. Once these feelings are present, intimacy is a natural decision, not a pressured negotiation. Here's an insight most men never hear. Women experience desire differently than men. For many men, attraction is immediate and visual. They see someone they find attractive, and the response is almost instantaneous. Heart rate increases, energy spikes, desire awakens. For women, attraction is layered. It grows over time, builds through context, emotional connection, trust, anticipation, and subtle cues. A woman might meet a man and feel nothing at first, then weeks later find herself deeply drawn to him. Not because she's playing games, but because desire has a natural rhythm. It develops through emotional experiences, and those experiences accumulate until her attraction reaches a tipping point. Understanding this completely changes how you approach intimacy. Instead of rushing, pushing, or worrying about the right moment, you focus on creating conditions that allow her desire to grow naturally. You focus on emotional alignment, shared experiences, subtle connection, and a safe, unpressured environment. This isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding human psychology, her psychology, and creating a space where desire can naturally flourish. The most important principle I want to share first is this. You never ask for intimacy directly. Let me repeat that because it's critical. Direct requests create pressure. Pressure triggers resistance. Resistance often leads to rejection. But an emotional invitation works differently. When you invite emotionally, subtly, without demanding or instructing, you create a scenario where she feels like she's choosing, not being coerced. The decision becomes hers. And when a woman feels ownership over her choice, rejection disappears. Think about it this way. When someone tries to sell you something aggressively, what do you feel? Even if you wanted it initially, the moment pressure is applied, your instinct is to pull back. Intimacy works the same way. When you ask directly, do you want to? You're applying social pressure. The conscious mind immediately starts evaluating risk, judging, doubting. But when you invite emotionally, when you speak to the subconscious and the feelings rather than the logic, you bypass the pressure. You create a moment that feels natural, not transactional. She doesn't feel like she's being asked to approve or reject. She feels like she's experiencing something together with you. So how do you actually create this emotional invitation? The key is to activate three emotional switches: safety, trust, and anticipation. If any one of these is missing, the moment won't feel right. Safety doesn't mean years of familiarity. It means she senses that you're not going to judge her, pressure her, or make her feel uncomfortable for following her instincts. Trust grows when your words and actions align, when you respect her boundaries without making her feel guilty for having them. And when you demonstrate consistency over time. Anticipation is the subtle energy, the tension, the excitement that comes from restraint, suggestion, and curiosity. It's what makes a connection feel electric rather than mechanical. Most men focus entirely on being impressive, funny, confident, charming, but forget that these three emotional foundations are what allow attraction to turn into intimacy. Without safety, trust, and anticipation, even the most magnetic man cannot trigger genuine closeness. And when you combine these three, desire grows naturally. It builds quietly in her mind, almost without her realizing it, until the moment arrives where closeness, intimacy, or touch is no longer a choice. It's an inevitable, mutual response to the emotional alignment you've created. Now that we've laid the foundation, let's get into the techniques that turn understanding into action, the methods that allow intimacy to develop naturally without pressure or desperation. The first technique is what I call the soft withdrawal effect, and it's deceptively powerful. Most men think escalation means leaning in, moving closer, touching more, or trying to push things forward. The reality is almost the opposite. The soft withdrawal effect is simple. Instead of moving in toward intimacy, you subtly create space. Not in a cold or dismissive way, but just enough to remove pressure and give her room to lean in emotionally. This small shift changes the dynamic completely. When a woman senses that you're comfortable with the pace and not pushing, she begins to feel safe, curious, and empowered. She starts to take the steps toward closeness on her own. Imagine a scenario. You're sitting close, the conversation flows, there's chemistry in the air. Most men would immediately try to escalate physically. That's when tension or hesitation often appears. But if instead you lean back just slightly, pause for a moment, or subtly create a little space, she suddenly becomes aware of her own desire. She wonders, why did he pull back? Does he want this, or is he waiting? And in that space, she starts initiating contact, moving closer, or showing interest. The magic is that rejection almost disappears because the choice feels entirely hers. You are not withdrawing because of disinterest. You are showing that you respect the natural flow of energy, and that respect itself creates desire. The second technique is the implanted thought shift, a subtle and psychological approach to encouraging intimacy without asking for it directly. Here, you guide her awareness toward the feelings she already has, without suggesting that she should act on them. Statements like, I really like the way our energy feels together, or it's so easy to be close to you, serve to articulate her subconscious feelings. You're not instructing her, you're reflecting her own experience back to her. Psychologically, this works because of a principle called priming. When you introduce words or concepts like closeness, connection, or natural energy into the conversation, they become more prominent in her mind. She starts to interpret her own feelings through the lens you've gently provided. It's important to note this isn't manipulation, it's guidance toward awareness of what she already feels. The more she recognizes that her experience aligns with yours, the more the emotional invitation feels natural and mutual. The third key technique revolves around allowing her to inhabit her feminine energy, which is essential for intimacy. Women experience closeness and desire most fully when they feel safe to express softness, warmth, trust, vulnerability, and openness. But these emotions only flourish when the man remains calm, steady, and composed. Nervousness, desperation, or overly aggressive behavior interrupts the natural flow, pushing her into protective analytical energy instead. Here's where the concept of max-line calm comes in. This is not stoicism, detachment, or silence. It's the grounded energy of a man who is fully present, comfortable in his own body, and unhurried about outcomes. He is calm, not needy, and emotionally steady. When a man embodies this energy, women feel safe. their guard lowers, and the natural feminine emotional state emerges. And when that happens, intimacy isn't something she has to decide on. It becomes a spontaneous response to the shared emotional experience. The fourth technique is about asking for a feeling instead of a yes. Most men make the mistake of asking, "Do you want to?" which triggers evaluation, doubt, and the fear of saying no. But when you shift the focus to her emotional state, you give her control and reduce pressure. Questions like, "Does this feel comfortable to you?" Or, "Does this feel too fast?" Invite her to check in with her own feelings rather than with your expectations. She no longer has to consider what you will think. She only considers what she actually feels. That subtle shift alone dramatically increases the likelihood of connection and intimacy. Next, there's mirroring her desire. Women don't decide intimacy purely based on how much a man wants them. They decide based on alignment of desire, expressed without losing composure. Too much intensity creates pressure. Too little seems disinterest. Mirroring is about matching her energy, not exceeding it. If she touches your arm, you gently touch hers. If she leans in, you lean in just enough. If she maintains eye contact, you hold it for the same duration. This mirrors the same hardwired social mechanism we learn as infants: connection through reflection. When done correctly, it creates a subconscious sense of we are on the same wavelength, building closeness without words. Finally, these techniques culminate in the moment's idea. Instead of being the agent pushing for intimacy, you highlight the shared emotional experience. "This feels really nice," or "There's such a calm energy between us right now." By naming the feeling of the moment rather than asking for action, you let the experience itself become the invitation. Women respond to authentic emotion, not requests. By letting the moment lead, intimacy feels natural, unpressured, and mutual. These techniques work together because they focus on emotional flow, not manipulation. You're creating a safe space, reflecting feelings she already has, letting desire build gradually, and highlighting the shared experience. Intimacy isn't something you ask for. It's something that arises spontaneously when the emotional conditions are right. When you combine safety, trust, anticipation, soft withdrawal, emotional mirroring, subtle priming, and max-line calm, rejection is no longer the default. It becomes an emotional choice that aligns with mutual desire. Now that you understand the techniques and the psychological principles behind them, it's time to integrate everything into a natural, fluid approach. The key is remembering that intimacy isn't a goal you push toward. It's an outcome that emerges when emotional conditions are aligned. Every interaction is a chance to build connection, trust, anticipation, and safety. When you focus on those elements, every step forward happens effortlessly, and rejection loses its power. One of the most overlooked aspects of intimacy is patience and timing. Desire, especially for women, doesn't always follow the clock or the moment you want it to. It grows quietly, layer by layer, and often the first spark is invisible. This is why rushing, over-eagerness, or forcing physical closeness almost always backfires. The more you focus on creating the right emotional environment, being calm, present, and emotionally aligned, the more her own desire naturally emerges. Your patience becomes a magnet, not a restraint. Another subtle but powerful principle is emotional calibration. Every gesture, word, and movement communicates energy. Too much intensity can feel aggressive. Too little can feel indifferent. The balance comes from observing her cues and responding at the same energy level. If she laughs softly, you mirror softly. If she moves closer, you match the movement. This calibration signals alignment and safety at a subconscious level, making intimacy feel like a shared dance rather than a transaction. Consistency and alignment are also critical. Every time you demonstrate calm, respect, and understanding, you reinforce safety. Every moment you honor boundaries without judgment, you strengthen trust. Every playful, curious, or anticipatory action subtly grows anticipation and emotional tension. These repeated, consistent emotional experiences accumulate, creating an invisible framework that makes intimacy feel inevitable when the moment arises. Now let's revisit the final but crucial piece, making the moment the guide. When you highlight and name the emotional quality of a moment, its calm, its warmth, its connection, you remove the burden of decision from her and place it on the shared experience itself. For example, saying something like, I love how easy it feels to just be with you right now, or there's something really comfortable and natural about this moment, does more than compliment. It validates the shared energy. It signals that intimacy is emerging organically, not because you are demanding it. When the moment itself becomes the invitation, the pressure disappears and desire flows naturally. Another subtle factor to keep in mind is the power of reflection. Women often process their feelings internally before expressing them. When you mirror what they show through words, gestures, and emotional energy, you help them articulate what they already feel. This reflection is not flattery, it's a recognition. By helping her feel understood and seen, you lower her guard and allow her natural desire to surface. This is how emotional alignment translates directly into intimacy without words or requests. It's also important to remember that intimacy is a shared experience, not a performance. You don't need to impress, push, or control outcomes. Your role is to be present, calm, aligned, and responsive. Every glance, touch, word, and pause contributes to a layered emotional environment. Women respond to feelings, not instructions. When she senses authenticity, comfort, and shared energy, intimacy becomes a mutual decision rather than a risk-laden choice. Finally, this approach works because it respects her autonomy and emotional rhythm. You're not asking for a yes. You're creating an environment where she wants to say yes herself. You're not instructing her to feel desire. You're helping her notice it within herself. You're not rushing a reaction. You're allowing natural buildup. By combining soft withdrawal, emotional mirroring, subtle priming, max line calm, anticipation, and moment-focused acknowledgement, you create a dynamic where intimacy is safe, desirable, and mutual. If you apply these principles consistently, you'll notice something remarkable. Intimacy no longer feels like a negotiation or a gamble. The tension of rejection disappears because she isn't being pressured to say yes or no. She is experiencing the emotional alignment you've cultivated. When all of these techniques come together, intimacy becomes a shared, natural, and deeply satisfying outcome, not a stressful or fearful event. Remember, this is not about manipulation. It's about awareness, empathy, and the intelligent application of emotional understanding. Women don't respond to force, they respond to alignment. They don't respond to pressure, they respond to connection. And when you create the conditions where desire, safety, trust, and anticipation naturally converge, intimacy flows effortlessly. So, as you go forward, focus on presence, emotional consistency, and subtle guidance of feelings rather than actions. Be patient, be calm, reflect her energy, highlight the moments, let the shared experience do the work for you. Intimacy becomes not something you chase, but something that arises naturally, beautifully, and mutually. By mastering these principles, you're not only preventing rejection, you're fostering real, authentic closeness. You're creating a space where intimacy isn't an achievement or a goal. It's a natural, emotionally aligned outcome of how you connect and how she feels with you. That's the real power. That's the subtle art of emotional invitation. And it's the key to intimacy that feels effortless, mutual, and deeply rewarding.